and welcome back to another episode of Cru Edu. I'm super excited about this episode because it's one of my favorite things to do as a keeper, and I think it's almost every keeper's favorite part of their day. So we're going to talk about enrichment today. During this presentation, I'm hoping to answer some questions for you guys about what enrichment is, when we use it, why we use it, and how we use it. So let's go ahead and start at the beginning with what is enrichment. So enrichment is defined as any item that encourages a natural behavior, and it challenges animals to think, problem solve, get exercise, and overall it just enriches the quality of life that each animal has. What can be used as enrichment? Well, almost anything. You can see here on this page that we're using a pumpkin for our lemurs, and that's something that they don't get all the time. It's not a normal food item for them. We would call it a novel food item. So they get really excited when they get to use those, or when they get to see those. You can also see our Eurasian lynx Nova sleeping on a Christmas tree, which is another thing we don't get to have every single day of the year. So it's just a special occasion when he would get to interact with the Christmas tree, and the cats all love the Christmas trees. You can also see our Kobati and our pair of marmosets, briar and thistle. You can see them using forage feeders that their keepers have placed in their exhibits. You can tell even Thistle is stretching and hanging upside down from a branch, something she would have to do in the wild to collect maybe fruits or nuts for her to eat. She's doing that exact same behavior here. There are several items you might think of as enrichment items, things like toys, but that's not everything. There are lots and lots of different ways to enrich animals. You can do things like music. Humans aren't the only ones that love music. Cockatoos love music too. So think about this enrichment presentation, not only for the animals that we have here at the zoo, but this can be used on your pets at home that will encourage them to problem solve. Let's talk about the different types of enrichment. There's several different types, but we're going to break them down into about 5 categories. These categories are not mutually exclusive, and they overlap quite a bit. These are all categories of enrichment that we strive for our animals here at the zoo to have, and they're all part of a successful enrichment program. Social enrichment, it's a big one, especially for primates or any herd animals. They're all things that like to be in large numbers together, and it's not just being in those large numbers. There are several things you can do that is considered social enrichment. Here you'll see Briar is checking himself out in the mirror. So mirrors can be considered social enrichment, as well as keeper interaction and even guest interaction. Every guest interaction an animal has is even enrichment for an animal. It's something new and it's something exciting, something they love to do. Food is a large portion of what an animal is looking for on a daily basis. So food is an easy way to enrich an animal's life. Like we talked about earlier, you can do forage feeders for animals who might forage in the wild, or even just uniquely present an animal's diet. And that can be fun and interesting for them to interact with. So here you'll see Blaze, our Red River hog. He's getting a birthday cake in this particular picture, something that he doesn't get every day, but something that's special and fun for him to interact with. Cognitive enrichment is the really fun one because it makes the keepers think just as much as it does the animals. Here you can see Keeper Rachel and Buddha, our American black bear, doing a training session. The goal of cognitive enrichment is to make our animals think outside the box and interact in new and fun ways with the world around them. Sensory enrichment. This can mean any of the 5 senses. So it can be taste, touch, smell, sound, or even encouraging vocal communication. So sensory enrichment can be used in several different ways. Here you can see Boogie, our Moluccan cockatoo. He's playing with a cup that's got some hearts on it. We used it because it was Valentine's Day this particular day. But those patterns, that could be considered visual enrichment. Well, you see there's also paper in there, which can be a new tactile thing for them to feel or interact with. Birds especially love to tear up things, so that's exactly what we're looking for with a sensory enrichment item, something they can hold and manipulate and use all of their senses on, or maybe particularly focuses on just one. The last important type of enrichment here is physical habitat. So the physical habitats that these guys would live in the wild are constantly changing. Whether it is from a severe storm comes through the area and completely changes the habitat that they're living in, or even deforestation, which many animals struggle with in the wild currently. The environment in the wild is constantly changing, so why wouldn't their environment in captivity? So here you can see Marvin, one of our skunks. He is forming his own den or bed for the night, and we have some straw in here that he's gonna pull into that little tunnel, and he's gonna make himself a nice comfy bed to relax in. And that right there is a natural behavior that he would do in the wild. He would make himself a nice bed to curl up in, and he's doing that exact same behavior here. I want to talk about the history of enrichment because, believe it or not, enrichment hasn't always been an important part of zoological facilities. It was just recently introduced in 1960s, and it's still a relatively new concept. That being said, it's also constantly evolving, and we're always learning new things and better ways to enrich our animals. So in the 1960s, people started to realize that the habitats they had produced for captive animals wasn't quite enough. It didn't have all of the things that they would have in the wild. So zoos started striving for more realistic, more natural habitats as far as exhibit design and also enrichment items. So that's when enrichment programs became astronomically important to zoological facilities. So once they acknowledged that this was a problem, it was very easy for them to strive for something different, to shift their focus and move towards making habitats more enriching for animals to interact with on a daily basis. They actually used a philosophy that was designed by farmers in England, and they were called the 5 freedoms. These 5 freedoms were what they considered to be basic humane rights of animals in captivity. The 5 freedoms are a pretty involved set of theories, but we can summarize by saying the basic needs of the animal, which were food and water, being able to be comfortable, free of pain, injury, or any other illness, the freedom to express natural behavior, and the freedom to not have to fear their surroundings or be in distress. So you can see how those very basic principles kind of formed into enrichment programs as a whole. We want to provide and make sure that those animals have all those things at all times. They don't have to worry about predators in the wild, and they don't have to worry about their health care because we have vet staff that does that for them. So these freedoms were really important in kind of paving the way for the enrichment programs as they are today in zoological facilities. Enrichment programs are different among all facilities. We're going to talk about how our facility particularly works their enrichment program. So enrichment programs, the majority of the things that they do will be supplying keepers with resources to make sure that they keep safety in mind when using enrichment, as well as forming new enrichment items. Because like I said, this is something that's always changing. We're always learning new things. However, I also think one of the most important parts of a enrichment program is to observe the behaviors that you're getting from these items. I think it's really a cool way for us to track what individual species or just individual animals like and dislike. And we can learn a lot about animals by watching the way that they behave with new enrichment items or even enrichment items they've had several times. The enrichment program here at the Alabama Gulf Coast Zoo is designed specifically to target behavioral goals of behaviors we would like to see from our animals, and then we figure out how we can make them simulate that. So let's say we want to increase exploration of an exhibit. There are some ways we could do that. Let's say our leopard Katrina isn't using the vertical space in her exhibit, and we want to encourage her to do that. We can take maybe some different scents or some different treats she might like, and hide them in specific areas of the exhibit she may have never explored before. And that's a great way to get her comfortable with going into those new areas, as well as just teaching her to use that vertical space. Good enrichment plans are assessed constantly, and we're always focused on safety. So what we have is kind of a little diagram here that shows you kind of the process we go through when we are developing a new enrichment item. So the first thing you're going to want to do whenever you're doing anything with animals is research, research, research. You're going to want to make sure you know everything there is to know about that animal. If you don't do the research, how will you know what they're supposed to be doing in the wild? So once you can find out those natural behaviors, we're going to set a goal. And then once you set that goal for the behavior you want to display, you can start brainstorming those possible ideas. Once we have those ideas in hand, then we can start putting pen to paper. We can start the discussion about how much an enrichment is going to cost to make. Can we make lots of them? Will it work for more than just one animal? Is it safe? Once we're able to come up with a concrete plan of what our overall idea is, we can build prototypes and make sure we can do safety checks from the prototype just by looking at them and having several people look at them. And that's where the job of the committee really comes in handy. And then, of course, the best part of any enrichment is going to be the test stage. Give it to the animal and see if they like it. Supervised enrichment can always be exciting for the animals and the keepers because, like I said, we love to see our animals do what they enjoy and show us what they like and dislike. So, of course, after we test the new enrichment item, we're going to make sure that our goal was met. Did the enrichment item encourage the behavior that we wanted? Maybe your enrichment item actually encouraged a different behavior, or the animal used it differently than you intended them to. It's still enrichment either way, but it's great to keep track of the way they behave and the way that they interact with those new things. So here at the zoo, our enrichment committee is very dedicated staff of members who aid other keepers in enrichment activities. They educate the staff in the importance of enrichment and keep us up to date on all the new things we're constantly learning about enrichment. We sat down with one of our enrichment committee members, Ashlyn, and we learned a little bit more about what it takes to maintain a zoo enrichment program and to keep our residents happy and healthy.
Okay, so this is Ashlyn. She's a carnivore keeper here and also on our enrichment committee. And I would like to ask you a little bit about what your committee's role is here at the zoo.
So we make sure that each of our departments are giving their animals daily enrichment. We make sure that they are species specific and they're appropriate for the type of animal that the enrichment is being given to. And we are hoping to eventually bring enrichment to the public and host a couple events where the public can help us make some enrichment for some of our animals.
How do you decide who gets what?
So we give enrichment based on a lot of natural behaviors, and so if an animal is used to digging, we can hide their food in maybe a pile of dirt and try something like that. You can give enrichment based on intelligence, so our primates are all very intelligent and they're very good at kind of figuring out puzzles or training different behaviors and things like that, and so we can give them a little more advanced enrichment. Some of our animals, like the carnivores, are very scent motivated, and so we can give them fun things like spices or any kind of herbs, and so they can get a new smell in their environment. So we can also use enrichment to kind of encourage exercise. So our large cats are used to really only using their energy for hunting, which they do not have to do because we provide them with a wonderful balanced diet every day. But it does mean that they spend a lot of their day sleeping, and so we can use things like training or various enrichments spread around their exhibit to get them kind of up and get them their exercise every day.
How do you ensure safety when you introduce new enrichment items to an animal?
So when we introduce any kind of new item, you always have to consider the item as a whole. You have to consider every individual piece. If it gets broken, could anything get swallowed? Can anybody ingest anything they're not supposed to? If there's any kind of like plants involved, you have to consider if it's toxic or not. And so when we get an enrichment approved, a keeper will suggest it and they will submit an official approval form to make sure that everything in their view is safe for it. It then gets passed on to a department head who also looks over it and makes sure that everything is safe and good to go. And then it finally goes to our curator. And so we have several sets of eyes looking over an item or a different scent or anything like that before it goes anywhere near an animal's exhibit to make sure, like I said, if could any of it get eaten, could that mess with it? If they break it, is it still safe for them? And so we have lots of eyes check over everything before anything goes near an animal.
What's your favorite enrichment to give?
So my favorite enrichment to give is not necessarily a specific item, but a type of enrichment. It's a puzzle feeder. So it's anything that kind of prevents the animal from getting to their food immediately. It's not just placed in the exhibit for them. So it's either hid inside of a box, or like for the primates, we can do like really complex puzzles for them to get to their food. And it makes them kind of think and work through a problem. And it's really cool to watch an animal kind of like solve a puzzle, and they have that moment where they're proud of themselves and they also get some of their food. It's really cool to be able to watch them think through something.
So the whole point of enrichment is encouraging natural behavior. So what natural behavior would puzzle solving simulate?
So for our primates, they forage for most of their diet. That is most everything they do in a day in the wild. And so this kind of stimulates that, where they have to kind of search around and figure out how they can get to whatever they need to get to. So our carnivores obviously are not hunting for their food, but it's still good for them to be able to kind of like figure out how to get to something. So we can give them their food even in something like just a simple cardboard box, or even for something like our bird species. If we give them whole nuts instead of nuts that are already shelled, they have to figure out how to crack them and figure out the weak spot in a nutshell instead of just kind of being given their food in a bowl. It encourages those natural kind of foraging behaviors.
And what's your favorite animal to enrich?
Right now, my favorite, it kind of changes every day depending on how everybody reacts to the enrichment they're given that day, because we switch it up every day. But right now it is Nandi, our 1.5-year-old female lion. She has such a fun reaction to almost anything that you give her. She gets really excited and kind of like either throws it around the yard, or she has to protect it to make sure Jabari can't play with it yet, and it's only hers for now. But she always has really fun reactions to everything, so she's a lot of fun to give new items to.
I have one more question. I mentioned earlier in our program that enrichment is always, or it seems to me to always be the keeper's favorite part of their day. Why do you think that is?
It's just so, when it comes to like the puzzle feeder kind of thing, like being able to watch them think, or being able to watch them kind of experience something new, even if it's big and scary, and they kind of have to like approach it with caution and see if it's gonna, jump out and scare them, or not that it would, but they don't know that yet. And so it's cool to see them interact with a new item and kind of find this new thing in their environment, and making sure that it's okay is always a lot of fun.
Now that you've heard a little bit from one of our committee members, I hope you guys have learned so much today. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Cru Edu. Thanks again for watching.